Hey guys, it's Tiny Tom Logan back with another video. And yes, you can probably tell by the tone of my voice and the size of the grin on my face that I'm rather happy to be talking to you about the Rampage 5 Extreme. It seems like I've been waiting for this for such a long time. There was many of us that thought the Rampage 5 Extreme may have come out on the X99 socket. But then when rumours started to come through about DDR4 wasn't far off, and that we may be getting a socket revision to be able to cope with it, that was where the Rampage 5 Extreme was destined to come. The Rampage Black Edition was essentially Asus just kind of taking the older board and then kind of giving it a bit of spit and polish to make it last that little bit longer, and that's generally what the blacks are. So for those of you out there that have been sending me messages, are we going to get a Rampage 5 Black Edition? Maybe in 12 to 18 months time you might get one, but you're certainly not going to be getting one for launch. So, Rampage 5 Extreme, X99 chipset, that's an all new chipset. They've beefed up the I/O, we've got M.2 on there. The M.2 is now running on PCI Express 3 bandwidth for 32 gigabits a second. There's loads of SATA Express. DDR4 is a new big thing with the CPUs as well, because the memory controller is on the CPUs. Just to be clear as well, because a lot of people have been asking, DDR4 and DDR3 are not compatible. The new CPUs, so the 2011 V3 CPUs, 5 series basically, 5820, 5830, 5820, 5930, 5960, they are not compatible with the old gen boards, and the older CPUs are not compatible with the new gen boards, just to be very clear. Also, when we get to talking a little bit about the Asus overclock socket, you will understand a little bit more there as well, because the sockets are actually different. The Asus socket is different to the Intel socket. That's confusing enough in itself, but hopefully I'm going to be able to, cover that with you, and you'll understand what the bloody hell Asus have done, and they've actually done an amazing job, because this thing is just, yeah. Anyway, so what we're going to do, there is a lot to cover, so get yourself comfy. You really are going to need a nice cushion, drinks, everything. If you're watching all of my videos at launch, then I will give you a cookie myself, because there are not only videos on the main OC3D TV channel, but I've got multiple videos on the Rush Kit channel as well. And my Rush Kit channel is one that not a lot of you are aware of, but it's the videos that I do that are much shorter. So whereas the 5960X review was basically an hour long, there are some quite short ones over there that are like 5, 6 and 7 minutes long, where we kind of chop everything up and make it much simpler and shorter, and yeah, just maybe go and take a look. But I'm not going to mess about any longer. I know that we need to get on with this, so let's just do it. Okay then peeps, so we do have to resort to some slides, but don't forget you can pause these. This is just to show you the absolute wealth of features in and around the board. One of the sections that I really like the most is the overclock zone, and the two best bits there are the retry button and the safe boot, but I will talk to you about those later on in the video. But remember those, they're the red and the white buttons in the top right, they're the tiny little ones. They actually play a brilliant role. We've got the M.2 socket there. It will do up to 110mm, and that's the first time I've seen support for M.2 cards or solid state drives or memory or whatever you want to call it, drives that long. Obviously it's DDR4. The overclock panel is featured again as well, and really I still don't like this, but for those overclockers and stuff out there that want to remove stuff off the boards, make things easier, that's cool, but for the general user I still really don't see the point, but that's just a personal opinion. Intel Ethernet, there is only one as well. We've actually got a Rampage with upgraded audio. Epic, because it wasn't done previously. It was always kind of an afterthought. But the idea with this is you can have your 4 graphics cards in, and you can still get some decent audio in there if you want. If we move on to the next slide, then this is another really easy way of me to show you where the fan headers are without me dragging you around the board, boring you. And then you've also got the sensors. Now the VRM sensor, the CPU sensor, the PCIe sensor and the motherboard sensor are all built in. The T sensors are ones that you can add on yourself if you want to, and it'll all get read through the BIOS as well. And you've also, like I said, got a really easy way there for you to be able to see where the fan headers are. Then when we move swiftly on, this is something that you need to get your head around really, because if you use the 28 lane processor, which at the moment is going to be the 5820, you don't have support for triple SLI, and you also have to make sure that you put your cards in the right place as well. So with these, as you can see, with the 40 lane, which is the 5960X, which is the 8 core, and the 5930K, which is a 6 core, you can see that we've got single, dual, triple and quad there, that's enabled. And then with the 28 lane processor, you can see that you've got single, dual and triple. The 4th lane doesn't get utilised at all because technically that's where your M.2 bandwidth comes from. So that's gobbled up completely. So if you've only got a 28 lane processor, that 4th slot is pretty much redundant as far as trying to enable crossfire and SLI is concerned. You could put it in there, it will be registered, but you won't get the option of being able to enable it as a crossfire or an SLI device. So that's just something that you also need to keep in mind with that as well. It may cause confusion, but the idea is if you're going to be putting 4 graphics cards in, they assume that you're going to have one of the better processors. Moving on to an I/O side of things, we've got previously the M.2 was run on PCI Express 2 ×4. These are Gen 3, so you've actually got 32 gigabits a second available there. I've also already covered the fact that you can now put up to 110mm long drives in there. You've got dual SATA Express, that's up to 10 gigabits a second. And then you've got your 11 AC Wi-Fi. There's also Bluetooth as well, but the Wi-Fi will do up to 1300 megabits a second, which is nuts. Specifications, I'm not going to read it out. Please pause it and we will move swiftly on so that we don't end up here for 90 minutes. But this is actually quite an interesting one because we've got the Rampage 5 and 4 side by side. And you can see the differences with the yellow. A lot of audio stuff is listed in there. You've got the anti-surge LAN guard there for your wireless. Obviously DDR4 is different. The socket is different. This is another thing. The X99 socket and the X90, or sorry, the socket that you'll have on an X99 chipset and the newer one is different. That's why it's called 2011-3. So the CPUs are not interchangeable, the memory's not interchangeable. It may as well have been called something different, but with a higher level product, we just kind of assume that you're going to have a higher level understanding with the customer as well. Okay then peeps, so this is a little bit more information on the handy overclock tools. We've got the safe boot and then we've got the retry. They do a very specific task that's actually very similar to each other, but with the safe boot button, if you have like an error when you're booting and on the PCI poster you start getting problems and it's hanging and it won't post properly, basically switch the rig off, as in power it down, don't switch the power supply or anything off, and then hit the red safe boot button. Then what that will do is that will boot you into the BIOS at stock settings. But I can hear you all saying now that what's the point of booting in at stock settings because we're going to have to change everything again. But this isn't like a clear CMOS button. What it will actually do is boot you into the BIOS at stock settings, so it will get you there, but all of your overclock settings will still remain for you to go in and tweak. So it can save you an immense amount of time. And also, if you're lazy like me and are forever wanting to go into the BIOS, you'll end up using this as just a quick go to BIOS button. The other button that they have on there is the white one, which is the ROG retry button. And essentially sometimes you'll be like, your system will hang and you'll go to press reset and that won't work, and you can't hold in the power button down to turn it off, that doesn't work. So you end up having to do a hard reset, which is like turning the power supply off. Well, instead of that now, you can use this ROG retry button. I've actually experienced with the Rampage, it's something I've reported to Asus. I don't know whether it's like an early BIOS problem or something, but some of the times when I've been hitting F10 to save from the BIOS, I've been getting DB errors. Now that would generally tell me it was a memory problem, but if I hit the retry button, it's then posted and gone straight into the operating system. So it just seems to be like a little hang with the post. But this actually gets around that. So sometimes when you do put a setting in, sometimes it won't post properly, it might not want to go again. But this will give you a complete fresh start without all the faffing around. So it's actually a very handy tool. I found it to be really handy over the time that I've had it here. Moving on to the direct cooling, the large heatsink on the left hand side near the I/O, many of you will recognise that as being a design similar to what was on the Rampage Extreme Black Edition from the previous generation of products on X99. Essentially what they've done is they've taken that design and they've kind of evolved it a little bit further, and now the top MOSFET heatsink, where all the power delivery is for the CPU, it is actually just above the CPU socket. The heat pipe now follows round from the larger heatsink, but it's direct contact. So it's in direct contact with the components that are underneath, and they say that it's making up to a 25% difference on your load temperatures up on those toasty hot MOSFETs. Moving swiftly on, this is something that a lot of people are really not aware of, where the Rampage Extreme sits in the Republic of Gamers motherboard lineup. Because previously, the way we were used to things, especially with the 2011s, you'd have like the Gene, and you'd have the Formula, and then you'd have the Rampage. But this is the way it's going to sit now, and the motherboard lineup is predominantly all Z97 products, with the 2011 Extreme sitting right at the top of the crowd. It's obviously the king, it's the granddaddy, it's the big baddie one. But if you look down at the bottom, we've got the Impact, and then we've got the Gene. So you've got the ITX, M-ATX. The two ATX ones are in the middle. They're like the mid-range price boards as well. You've got the Hero and the Ranger there. You move up to the kind of performance sector and the more expensive, above £200 mark. You get the Formula, which is still Z97's, got the water cooling, the nice armour and everything on it, and then you move up again into the Extreme, onto the EATX form factor, which, don't worry, it doesn't mean it's not deeper, so it's not got extra PCI Express slots. It's actually just about an inch wider. So worst case scenario, with most cases, it just means it may hang over your cable grommets a little bit, but you have the Extreme at the top. At this present moment in time, because I have specifically asked Asus about this, there isn't anything in the diary for a Republic of Gamers Rampage Gene. There's nothing there at the moment. The only Gene that they're planning on, or that is, you know, obviously we've got the Z97 Maximus Gene, but it's only going to be a time will tell thing as far as the Rampage is concerned. I can kind of help you with a little bit of this to explain it in a better laid out way than this as well. So I thought this might help you visualise the range a little bit better, because this is it in its lineup. Like I said, at the moment there is nothing in the diary official. Maybe they've not decided yet, but Rampage Gene, they're not, you know, yeah. I hope they do one, because I'd like to see it as well. But anyway, so we start with the Z97 Maximus 7 Impact ITX board, move up Z97 Maximus 7 Gene Z97 board. They're all Z97s apart from the end. I'm not going to keep saying it. Then you get the Maximus 7 Ranger, Maximus 7 Hero, then we've got Maximus 7 Formula, and then we move up right to the end, the big granddaddy, the flagship motherboard, which is the Rampage 5 Extreme, which is obviously the DDR4 board, 2011 3, then the X99 chipset. It's literally the all singing, all dancing, bosh. Okay then peeps, so our first look at the naked Rampage. Now this is a sight to behold, because it's obviously the 5th iteration of said Rampage, and I love it. It does have a familiar feel to it. You wouldn't be, you know, apart from this up here, which is obviously a design feature that's come across on the Black Edition, it does feel very much like the Rampage 4. And when I said it, I thought I may as well get it out. So we've got the Rampage 4, and then we can put it next to the Rampage 5. Now, yes, when you put them side by side, it does make the 4 look a bit dated, but it should. It's had a good working life, the old girl. It's due to be retired now, but it does mean that we've got this sexy 5 coming in to take its place. And I think Asus have done a cracking job of making the design look good, but without taking it that little bit too far. The Black Edition style heatsink definitely was a step in the right direction, because that was even something that I liked. But we've got up in the top corner, I mean, what I'm going to do now, I'm going to show you a slide, because otherwise we will be here all day. So as you can see, on the slide, we've got this so much. So pause it, just so that you can read and bring it in. But so highlights for me, up in the top left-hand corner, microfine chokes, IR power stage ICs, 10K metallic black caps. You've got the overclock socket, which we'll talk about in a minute. You've got the X socket, which you can take the backplate bit off where the threads are, which I will show you in a minute. Intel Ethernet. You've got the Supreme FX. You've actually got a Rampage with decent audio. First time ever. The overclock zone, safe boot, retry button. Those two things are amazing, and I will talk to you again about those in a minute. It's just, there's so much there. But what we're going to do is, if we come back to actually have a look at the board, I'm going to show you around the board itself, and then I do need to show you some slides, because there is so much that we need to do and show with this board. It's absolutely unreal. I mean, just to kind of pick stuff out, okay? So I'm going to zoom in just so that we don't get any shadows or anything. You can see here, we've got the safe boot button, and I'll show you the slide in a minute. But essentially, if you're trying to boot and it hangs, you just press that button. When you press that button, it will boot into your BIOS with stock settings, but all of your overclock settings will still be there. So it will get you to the BIOS fine, and then you can find the bit that made it hang and tweak it, so that you don't have to, do you know what I mean? You're not going to lose all your settings like you always used to, saving overclock profiles and stuff. Sometimes you get a problem where it just won't post properly. It'll go to start and it doesn't do it. So rather than having to switch the power off, or, because a lot of the time you have to switch the power supply off, you can use the retry switch, and essentially what that does is it just reset everything, not the settings, but it will start again from scratch and try to boot it again with the same settings that were there. So it's basically, when the reset button doesn't work, you hit the retry button. So you've got these two little handy buttons that could, especially when you're really, really wanging the overclocks, these two little buttons could end up getting a lot of use. It's just a shame they've not got an immediate boot to BIOS button that we can use. But anyway, so we've got the start and the reset, we've got the dip switches, so you can turn PCI Express lanes off. This, just so that you know, if we have the PCI Express lanes up, if you had 3 or 4 cards in and the middle card died, it could cause a blue screen, or it not to post, you just get a graphics card error. And if you've got dice pots on, LN2 pots, or it's water cooled, it could mean you'd have to rip the rig apart to find out which one the problem was. Not with this, you don't. You can literally turn each of them off individually, restart, still blue screening, go back, switch it off, take the switch off and turn it back on again, try another one, and you can find out which one's dud. Which, when you're overclocking and stuff, it can mean the difference of all the thawing, or ripping your loop apart, all that type of stuff. It can actually get your rig running again, which is spot on. You can see what we were talking about with the chokes and the caps and stuff up here. We can't see all the IR stuff because it's hidden underneath this heatsink. But the heatsink on this, the heat pipe here that goes underneath is in direct contact with it. It's a direct CU one. So there's the copper's exposed on the heat pipe, and that goes straight down onto the MOSFETs that are there. 24 pin. You got your M.2 here, which is over 100 mil long. It's 110 mil long, so you can get an enormous one there. There's your normal 80. That's the biggest that you get on most motherboards. So there's a lot of M.2 expansion there. I've not even seen a 110 mil long M.2 yet. So, that's how new that is. Internal USB 3, internal USB 3. You've got a soundstage button while we're down here. Internal USB 2, you've got the BIOS switch here, so you can switch between the BIOSes. You've also got the keybot button there, which is so that you can use the F buttons on your motherboard. I'm pretty much going around all this, I'm not even going to need the slides. All of your SATAs around the back. It's, honestly, this thing it's packed to the rafters. But if I go back and I show you the slide, essentially fastest data transfer speed ever. Speaks for itself. You can see what I said to you about the M.2 slot there going up to 110 mil, 2 SATA expresses, and you can also see that rather than 10 gigabits a second, you've got the 32 gigabits a second on the M.2 there, which is amazing. If we go across, this is a pause moment. If you want to see the full specifications there, pause the video and I won't bore you by talking over all the stuff. other than highlighting the 3000 megahertz plus that you can get with the memory on the overclock. I do know that there are 3,200 megahertz kits, but I'm also hearing rumours of 3333 being possible. If we move on again, more specs, but this is to compare the Rampage 5 Extreme with the Rampage 4 Extreme that I showed you previously. So we've obviously got the DDR4 compared to DDR3. The DDR3 in the last one was up to 2400 megahertz. That was with overclock. I have to admit though, I did get some rather enormous scores with a 3970X. I was running 2550 on that, so you can really push that little bit further. So that also gives you an inkling with the 3000 megahertz at that set there. I know G.Skill are selling 3200 megahertz kits, so you've obviously got that. We've got the overclock socket, which we will talk about in a minute. It's E80X, which just means it's a bit wider. The two boards are the same. We've got a 4-way SLI and crossfire. It's pretty much the same with the other one, but you do have to be careful with your CPU on this one because they're not quite, you know, the CPUs aren't quite the same. But I'm not going to bore you with the rest of it. But look at all the yellow stuff, the Intel Ethernet, the Gamer First, the LAN guard, the anti-surge side of it. We've actually got good audio on this. There's a lot there. There really is. The handy overclock tools. This is that safe boot bit I said to you about, but this is the official slide for it. So take a look at that. But then if we move swiftly on, it also talks to you about the retry button, which is what I said to you about before. I have spoken about it, but I just wanted to show you so you can see the official blurb in case I didn't make perfect sense. If we move on again, this is the direct cooling that I said to you about. That in that top section, you've got the bare copper heat pipe that goes straight into contact with the MOSFETs. And then this is a great one for those of you who are interested in all the fan connectors and stuff. So what you can see is we've got the T sensors are sensors that you can add in yourself, and then they will show up in the BIOS and in your programs. You've also got the you've got bottom right, you've got a motherboard temperature sensor. You've also got a temperature sensor for the PCH, which is your chipset, the CPU, and then you've also got the VRM. They will also show up in your temperature tools. But then all the little fan icons show you where the fan headers are that you can use as well. I actually think that's a very, very handy bit of information there if you're planning on building a rig. But also, this is all going to show up in your BIOS, so you can set your fan profiles up, and you can use the desktop software to monitor and alter these as well. This is also something that is quite interesting, because in the Z97 selection, we didn't get an Extreme, and there will not be a Z97 Extreme. So there will not be a Z97 Maximus Extreme. That's been killed off now. They're not going to do it. Essentially, the way it works is you go Impact, Gene, Hero, Ranger, Formula on Z97, and then if you want an Extreme, it's the Rampage Extreme. There are rumours that there may be, at a very later date, a Rampage Gene, but nothing's been confirmed yet, and at this present moment in time, that slide is correct. That is the ROG motherboard lineup. This is another good one for you guys to take a look at. It's the PCI Express configuration. You've got the 40-lane layout at the top, and then you have the 28-lane layout at the bottom. The 28-lane CPU is the 5820. The ones at the above, that's the 5930K and the 5960X, and they've got 40 lanes. So if you have a look quickly, to just have a look down there, you can see that you cannot do 4 cards on the 5820. That's just not going to be possible. What we can also say is with 2 graphics cards on the big card at the top, you know, with the 40 lanes, you can have 16 times PCI Express 3. If you go over to 3-way SLI Crossfire, 16888, and then if you go on to 4-way Crossfire, 16888. So that's actually a better PCI Express layout than the way that they were previously as well. So, back to the motherboard itself. One thing that we need to do now is we need to look at some of the stuff that comes in the box. So you do get, this is your Asus wireless and Bluetooth. This is magnetic, so this you can stick on your case or stick round the back of your case. At I-Series, we had it underneath the flap like that on the top. because they use that on a lot of the boards. We said about the X socket, and this is the X socket, and essentially what this does is around the back here, you can see that it spreads out on the motherboard, and you have the thread holes, which is where you directly screw your heatsink in. Well, by using this, you get rid of these threads, and then you can just mount a normal heatsink in if you want. But more importantly, and the main reason for this, is so that you can fit your LN2 pot or your dice pot direct onto the motherboard. So that's what that's for. Backplate is a nice nickel kind of chromy type of affair. Nice soft on the back. It's a shame this bit on the back isn't black, but anyway, you've got that there. We do have the overclock station-y thing. This can go in your optical bays if you want, or you can whiz it out and you can have it stand on your desk, and it goes on your desk like that. But the problem with having it standing on your desk is the power and the connector and everything are on the bottom, and it doesn't, a lot of the time it can fall over. Now the idea with this is they've taken a lot of the board buttons off of the board to simplify it, because a lot of the other manufacturers, they just have buttons everywhere. But they've simplified it by trying to put them on this. And if you're overclocking and stuff, okay, fine. But this isn't the type of thing I would kind of suggest that you really need on your desk. And it's definitely, it never has been, because I've never personally liked this, and I don't think I ever will. Asus did try really hard when I went to talk to them in London, and this was something I did, you know, have a moan about to their face. It's just a gimmicky thing. Now, like I said, if you're overclocking and stuff, and you're trying to break records, your 8-pack or whatever, this may come in really handy for you. But for your average Joe like us that just wants an expensive motherboard, yeah, but like a gaming rig, this is just going to create clutter either in your rig or on your desk. And the cable's definitely not long enough to have it tidily on your desk either. It's one of those ones where they've never really gone that extra step to make it work for both. So I would call this an overclocking aid, rather than something that, you know, like the rest of us with just water cooling and, you know, just going to end up building a system really want in our rig. Now, you do get all your crossfire bridges and your SLI bridges and stuff like that, but there's a couple of bits and bobs. You get the door hanger, and then that is your only badge that you get. And I think that's a bit of an oversight, because with the black edition, you got one of those, and you don't get that this time. Now, this is just pure sex on a stick. If they'd have taken that pattern from there and put that down there, they could have bettered it. They really could have done. And this was the first time that I ever said, actually, that's a badge that I like. And I've had one on Orca ever since, because I've got a Rampage 4 Extreme in Orca. So I think Asus have missed a bit of a trick with this, and they dropped the ball. And to be honest with you, I think for most of us, we would have rather have had an updated, nicer version of this than that overclocking thingy, horrible thing. But anyway, so that's enough of all of that. I showed you the new Rampage, I showed you the old Rampage. It's now time for me to get this built into a system, and we will be back shortly to show you our bench rig. Okay peeps, so I promised you I was going to talk about the overclock socket, and when you look at these like this, it's quite difficult to tell between the two. I know what I'm looking for, and I can't really tell between the two. These are just two bare sockets off of motherboards that I asked to get off of Asus. When I was at an event, they were getting passed around the event, and I was like, hold up a minute, I need those for a video, because taking photos of these doesn't really make a lot of difference. Where we have the video format that we need to do, this just works in a much better way for us. But the thing is when I turn these over, that's when things are going to get a bit real. So we have the Intel standard socket on the left, and we have the Asus overclock socket on the right. Now what happened is Asus said to Intel, what do these missing pins do? Why are they not full? There's still 2011 pins in this one. And Intel basically turned around to Asus and said, doesn't matter, that's the socket that we're using, that's the socket that we're putting out for launch, that's the socket that you need to use. So Asus kind of went, okay, and they went off and they reversed engineered what the pins meant. So they did a lot of testing, trying to work out which one of these pins, what they did, how they could better utilise them. And essentially, they've come up with their own modified 2011 socket with all of those extra pins in them. And basically those extra pins give us more performance, stable voltage for the CPU, actually gives us more bandwidth for the CPU with a DDR4 memory, and it can make some huge differences with voltages for your memory as well. Some of the other boards, you know, you may be needing kind of like 1.3 volts, 1.4 volts to really push memory voltages and memory overclocks more, and they reckon that the Asus can be down to like as simple as 1.2 and 1.3. So it can actually mean that the overclock socket means you can run lower voltages, which obviously means lower temperatures, and it's going to be more stable as well. It could be amazing. But again, and this is something that I said at the event at the time, was how do Asus know that this wasn't meant to have been a later revision, like going from Z87 to Z97? Could the socket have been a refresh for Intel at a later date? Now that's an interesting question that only time is going to answer. Okay then peeps, so up in the top section of the motherboard, if I just zoom you in a little bit, you can see the three switches. You've got the red, the black and the white. Now the white is the retry button, which, like I said, if it hangs, you can just hit that and it will do like a complete reset without having to turn your power supply and everything off to do the cycle. The red one is the safe boot button, which is the most handy one, and I've actually been using this as a BIOS button as well. And by BIOS, I mean like a go to BIOS button, because say for argument's sake, our system's hung and we need to go back into the BIOS to reset everything. Rather than having to clear all your BIOS, what you can do, press the red button. Like I said, you can see it starts up. It's just like a power button, and I'll show you through the whole process. I actually really like this button. It is meant to go off. It's, like I said, it's just doing the cycle because it's essentially loading up the stock profile. Just waiting for like the keyboard lights have just come on. There's the screen, and then if I zoom you in, you can see it says safe mode, blah 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 blah. Press F1 into F1, into the BIOS rather, once you've pressed F1. But once we get in there, all of the overclock settings are actually still there. So it's booted in at stock, and you can tell that by over here. Look, CPU 3000 megahertz, BCLK at 100, but you can see down here we've actually got BCLKs at 130. The CPU strap's 125. So there's you've got in there without the need to change everything. And like I said, I've been using this as a quick go to BIOS button when I'm starting the rig up and I know I just need to go to BIOS and I don't have to continuously press delete. I've just been pressing this. It's absolutely epic. Okay, so a quick look at the rig, although you've already kind of seen it previously, but anyway, so we've got the Rampage 5 Extreme in there with the 5960X 8-core processor. We've got 16 gigabyte of G-Skill. It's the new Ripjaws 4 memory in there. It's 3000 megahertz. It's 15, 15, 15, 35 at 1.35 volts. So the timings are quite tight for 3000 megahertz, but obviously it's got a little more volts needed for it to operate. But still, 3000 megahertz is a bit bonkers mental. We've got a H105 taking care of the cooling, and the fans on there are the new SP120 white LED fans. So we've got the AFs in the rest of it, and then the SPs in the top for the RAD. Then we've got a SanDisk Extreme Pro solid state drive nestled away in the bottom. Round the back we've got an AX760i taking care of the power with some individually braided cables. And the graphics card, we're using a stock GTX 780 Ti, and that's just because I forgot, for the sake of the video, to put the Matrix GTX 780 Ti in, because I've modified the BIOS on this so it's running at stock. But anyway, so I should have fitted that. I've forgotten, but never mind, I'm only human. So yeah, that is the test system that we're going to be using for the for the entire video. But now, really, it's time to get into the operating system itself and have a look at how far I managed to push this board. Okay then, peeps. So with the Rampage, even though we did have very limited time with it, we've pretty much just concentrated on the overclock test as a whole, but we also ran the Corsair LPX 2800 MHz memory and the G-Skill 3000 MHz memory at stock. But then we chucked everything together that we could, and then we ended up with a combined overclock of everything. So we ended up at 4.55 gigahertz, near enough, as you can see on the screen, 35 multiplier, with what was set in the BIOS as 130 BCLK. We managed to take the memory up from 3000 megahertz to 3150 megahertz. Again, this was with very limited time. We didn't change the voltage on the memory, and we didn't change the timing. So there's definitely more that we can get here. But with the, like I said, with the limited time that I had, this was the best that I could do in the few hours that I had to play around with it before I needed to continue the testing. Just to let you know that we managed to turn this review around in a day. And that was with all the videos and everything that we've managed to do. So it was pretty much a 24-hour straight slog, but we've got it done. And in fact, at the time of videoing this, it's not quite 24 hours yet, but it will be done in time for NDA. But anyway, so we've got the memory up to 3150 megahertz with stock times and stock voltages. So this G-Skill stuff is fucking mental, is the most polite way that I can put it. And with the CPU, if you have a look, it's at just 1.32 volts. 1.3 volts, sorry. I reckon I can probably get this up to around the 4.6 gigahertz mark with maybe some water cooling on there. I may need to change the cooling, but I'd say I can definitely get more out of this and keep the temperature safe as well, because with this as it's set now, our maximum temperature on the hottest core was 81, and that was in a 22 degrees temperature controlled room as well, so I was more than happy with this. Now we've got our W prime run. You can see there from that, you can see the actual scores, but if I was to magically bring up the graph, you can see that the Rampage could just pretty much decimate everything. It's faster out the box than the 5960X there with the 2800 megahertz. You can compare the two, and you can actually see that we've pretty much got a 2-second difference just by changing the motherboard. There was no changes for anything else. 2800 to 2800 are identical systems apart from the board itself. But when you go up to the top, you can see the overclock. We managed to drop another 2 seconds from going onto the on the Rampage Extreme overclock. The overclock was higher. Obviously, we got higher memory as well. So to be able to take 2 seconds off of Prime with essentially, you know, just memory changes and a slightly different overclock. Now we use IDA to do quite a lot of our testing, and on this you can see it's the classic ones. We've got AES, ZLib, PhotoWorks and CPU Queen. We've actually organised these by CPU Queen. But what you can see from this is the Rampage, again, is at the very top of our graphs. 2800 megahertz is the third one down. It's quicker than the 5960X 2800, which was done on the deluxe board. It's put in an amazing show there. The only thing here that was slightly confusing, well, not confusing, but I want to explain it, is the 3000 megahertz. Basically, the BCLK on the 3000 megahertz is lower than what you need to tie into the 2800 megahertz. So the CPU tests here actually prefer or work better with a higher BCLK, and it doesn't necessarily matter so much about the memory speed with these. So that does explain those two, and that's why it's down there. It's not because it's performing worse, it's just because, you know, the settings are actually different. Going on to the memory tests for IDA, we've got copy, write and read there. So read, write and copy, whichever way you want to put it, and they are sorted by copy. Again, just an amazing showing here. Everything here is Rampage at the top. So compared to the other stuff that we've done previously, you can see that they taper off. But the Rampage has done amazingly well in these graphs. It does go to show how much time and effort they've put into getting the BIOS right, ready for launch, for it to just completely decimate another Asus product. So they've done very, very well here, especially when you consider the 2800 megahertz results to the 2800 megahertz results because they are identical memory sticks, CPU, clocks, everything, and the only difference is the motherboard. Now our gaming results, this is gaming, and the comparisons are all 5960X. If you want to see the 5960X compared with the 4960X, the 4790K, you know, all of the previous generation and lower generation CPUs, go and look on the main CPU review, because obviously this is the motherboard that we're testing, so we're comparing it to other motherboards and CPUs the same. The CPU result we were testing, you know, and comparing it to other CPUs as well. So if you are interested in the gaming results with the other ones, go and look up the main 5960X review on the Overclock 3D website or on OC3D TV. But here again, as you can see, Rampage Extreme is at the top of the graph. And it's done, you know, really well in every single one of those. For there to be any difference whatsoever in gaming results with the same CPU, it does make it's an eye-opener, let's put it that way. Sometimes you can have the best overclock and it doesn't translate into games at all. So the fact that every single one of those results on the Rampage Extreme overclock is higher is testament again to that gaming heritage. Okay then peeps, so did you make it to the conclusion without skipping? If you did, please tell me in the comments underneath. But go and get yourself a cookie. I think you've deserved it. I think you've earned it. But the Rampage Extreme. Now, generally this would be where we'd be flashing the, it's this side actually, I need to kind of remember. We'd generally be flashing up the Performance Award. But we've kind of gone and broke with tradition and we've gone gold. Because one of the things we did with the 5960X, we used the Deluxe for that, and then we moved on to the Rampage. And just across the board, even instantly, I was noticing lower temperatures and lower voltages. The board, because when you put on XMP, the board will auto change like CPU volts and stuff for you. And this is something that a lot of people aren't aware of. Auto does not mean stock. Auto means the board can do what it likes with it. So for argument's sake, the Deluxe auto set the CPU to 1.2 volts for 2800 megahertz memory. So up from 1.05 up to 1.2 just by enabling XMP. So it then wasn't at stock anymore, and the CPU was running at about 20 degrees hotter than it was before, 15, 20 degrees. With this, exactly the same scenario, exactly the same memory, but the Rampage was only putting 1.15 in. I could actually get it all running at complete stock, but these things are kind of like fail-safe procedures because there's going to be the silicon lottery that's going to take in effect. So they have to kind of have a setting for the best of, you know, like for everything essentially. But no matter what, the Rampage was straight away, it was showing its heritage. It was showing that pedigree. It was showing you that it was that little bit better than the Deluxe. And don't forget, I'm only comparing an Asus product with an Asus product here, so I'm not bashing brands or anything like that before the fanboys go crackers. The overclocking itself, I've really not had much time with this to try and get this done for NDA, so that I know there's going to be people out there that are going to be waiting to hear my review and my thoughts on the Rampage 5. We've literally worked through the night, and we're only like a few hours away from NDA now, and I'm still filming. Literally, it's just been an absolute ball ache. That's without, you know, the amount of work that we've all had to put into the written review and the photos and all the videos and everything on RushKit. We still bloody managed to get it done. So, it was just, even with the limited amount of time and the fact that I was pulling my hair out, trying to make sure that I could get stuff done and make sure I could get, you know, decent settings and, you know, explore everything. So, you know, trying to find your multiplier maximums, trying to find your base clock maximums, all that type of stuff, fiddling around with the Encore. I actually managed to get this running at lower volts with quicker, or rather higher overclocks than the Deluxe that we did direct previous. And it was actually so much easier to do as well. Any times I was pushing things a little bit too far, the board is so easy to read, it's unreal. A couple of times I was just having to use the reboot button. There seems to be something with the BIOS. I kept getting DB errors, which is technically memory, but you hit the retry button and it was booting up and it was actually stable. So that's something I have emailed Asus about. They know about that. It'll probably get fixed in a revision. But it's not necessarily a fault with the board. It's probably just some wanky bit of code somewhere. If you did a hard reset and then started up again, it was fine. So if you do start getting those problems, if you have it yourself, do try that retry button, because it is actually massively, massively handy. Also, other little features on the board, that boot to, the safe mode, brilliant. I've been using that rather than the power button and then smash and delete. I've just been hitting that because it just takes you to the BIOS. All you then have to do is press F1 once, boom, you're there. There's no hassles. It's brilliant. It would be nice if there was a just go to BIOS button, but anyway, you know, we can't, you know, pick and choose about everything. The little overclock thing that goes on your desk, we think the same about that as we have done from when it first emerged. Maybe for an overclocker that's actually going to use it, but for someone that's going to have it, you know, like an end user, normal user that's going to be like, oh, I can put that on my desk. The cable still really isn't that great. The actual using it still really isn't, you know, that brilliant. It's just going to add mess. It's not been done particularly well. You know, if they were going to make it as like a desktop toy, for want of a better term, then they could, you know, polish it a little bit better for that kind of use. But I've kind of got used to the idea now. They won't give a monkeys about it because they just assume that it's going to be sat on a bench with next to an LN2 pot, and you know, and people are just going to be smashing it with gloves and stuff. So that's the reason why that's there. I don't particularly like it, but I never have done, and I'm not going to change my tune on it. Not even if they made it out of white plastic, I wouldn't like it. That's how much I don't like it. But the Rampage itself, because I really am running out of time, so I have to try and whiz on with this. It's just amazing. And normally with the high price stuff, we kind of like second guess it and we're like, you know what I mean? But even just in the Asus Deluxe, we've seen a difference there. It's more stable, there's lower temperatures, we were using lower volts. We've pushed stuff up more. We've managed to, I still think that I can push this overclock further. I can definitely get more out of that memory as well. I wouldn't be surprised if in a couple of weeks I'm back and I'm talking about 3,300 megahertz on this with an enormous overclock as well. I personally reckon I can get 4.6 with this. It may seem like a low overclock because a lot of people online have been going, if it doesn't do 5 gigahertz, well fuck me boys, if this thing did 5 gigahertz, it'd be blowing the doors off fucking everything. We do need to remember that there's 8 cores in there now, proper cores as well, with hyper-threading. Don't just be a noob and focus on that megahertz thing. 4.5 up from 3 gigahertz is still a 50% overclock. I mean, that's still enormous. The fact that you get a 50% overclock and all 8 cores are still singing together, and you've also got all your memory and everything running higher than it should be, up in the overclock, it's an enormous overclock when you think about the package itself. So if you're going to be one of those boys that's just like, oh, I must have 5 gigahertz, and sorry, take your school bag and go and buy an AMD processor and then come back crying when your electric bills have gone up, your room's always mega hot, and things actually don't run as well anymore. But if you're a grown-up that understands that sometimes you have to think about the bigger package and you want to use a less electric, lower temperatures, and this thing is going to absolutely blow the doors off of everything that you've ever considered to be quick in the past, then and only then are you going to be ready to start thinking about buying a Rampage 5 Extreme. It's fucking awesome, and there's no nice way I can put it. I don't care if you're going to end up running off to your church now and saying that the bad man on YouTube has been swearing. This thing truly deserves it. And completely off my pickle with too much coffee and lack of sleep, this is Tiny Tom Logan with the gold award-winning Asus Rampage 5 Extreme out. Ding! All lips around my mouth. Yeah, I'm gone.